The band didn't stop playing. The entire world just held its breath. She walked in wearing a dress that didn't ask for permission and carrying a 6-month pregnancy that would no longer be ignored. And at her side was a name Ethan Vance thought he had erased from his own history. The glass slipped from his hand before his mind could catch up. On the night that was meant to be his coronation, he was about to learn the true meaning of losing control. It was the most anticipated night of the year on the corporate calendar, the Apex Ball. A gala that blended luxury, power, and ambition in measures as precise as the champagne flowing into crystal flutes. Ethan Vance had arrived at his zenith. At 38, he'd become the face of the nation's green energy revolution, a self-made billionaire, hailed as a visionary, feared as a predator. The flashbulbs of the paparazzi followed him as if drawn by a magnetic force. But tonight, he craved more than just attention. He wanted to be worshipped, and that's why on his arm was Sophia Thorne, a rising executive, 20 years his junior, known behind closed doors as the broker who could bend Wall Street to her will. Her hair was pulled into a severe bun, her eyes were sharp and calculating, her figure sculpted by discreet cosmetic procedures. She wasn't just his date. She was his trophy, the living proof that Ethan no longer had to pretend to be humble or play by the old rules. As they entered the grand ballroom, the cameras erupted. Ethan offered a smirk of superiority, his hand resting on Sophia's waist like a king claiming his prize. He believed he had conquered everything and everyone, but fate has a wicked sense of irony. And in that very ballroom, under those same golden lights, a buried past was about to surface, not with a shout, but with quiet footsteps, a rounded belly, and the one man Ethan had fought the hardest to forget. Before he was Ethan Vance, the billionaire. He was just Ethan, the kid from a blue-collar town in the Rust Belt. He grew up surrounded by stacked boxes, borrowed library books, and past-due notices, too smart for his neighborhood, too hungry to let the world define his limits. At 25, he launched his first solar energy company out of a rented garage. By 30, he was on magazine covers. By 35, he was buying bottles of wine that cost more than his mother made in a year. Clara met Ethan back when he was still eating cold leftovers and sketching business plans on greasy napkins. She was an analyst at an environmental non-profit, a quiet idealist, full of questions about the world and the people in it. Their love story was written in the quiet moments, during long days and small victories. Clara believed in him, not in what he could acquire, but in the man he could become. They shared years of support, sacrifice, and promises, whispered between sleepless nights and spreadsheets. But time has a way of exposing what success tries to conceal. Ethan changed. He began to pull away. Late-night meetings turned into all-nighters. Dinners together became an exercise in silence. His eyes, which once searched only for hers, started seeking validation from other, more powerful people. And then, Sophia arrived, first as a consultant, then a confidant, then a shadow that followed him everywhere. Clara saw it all, but she didn't fight. She would ask, he would deflect. She would wait up. He would forget she was there. Until one day, she simply stopped asking. That was when Ethan stopped hiding, and when Clara stopped pretending she couldn't see, when Clara found out she was pregnant. For a fleeting moment, she thought it could be a homecoming, a bridge back to the Ethan she first loved, the one who'd make coffee at 2 a.m. and laugh with a mouthful of toast. She told him on a grey Tuesday morning as he was firing off emails at the breakfast table. She showed him the positive test with a nervous smile. Ethan glanced at it, his eyes narrowed. He mumbled, "That's great," and went right back to typing. No hug, no question, nothing. In the days that followed, Clara tried to make excuses for him. He's under a lot of pressure. He just doesn't know how to process it. It'll sink in soon. But the only thing that sank in was the silence. A silence that built a wall between them, thick and invisible. She started sleeping alone. He always came home late, and even when he was in the house, he was never truly present. The week of the gala, Ethan spent more time with his tailor than with her. He spoke of the event as if it were a Nobel Prize. "A milestone in my career," he'd said. The night before, he tried on his tuxedo in front of the mirror and asked if he looked sharp. Clara nodded. He never asked if she was going, and on that Friday night, while she stood in her nightgown in the still, empty nursery, she heard the front door click shut. A moment later, her phone lit up with the first photos: Ethan Vance at the Apex Ball. On his arm, the executive Sophia Thorne, and in that instant, the silence stopped being a dull ache and became a primal scream. The world kept moving, but Clara was frozen. While Ethan was bathing in the glow of the ballroom, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at a blank wall. The nursery was still just an idea, like so many other things they had postponed for a future that would never come. On her screen, headlines stabbed at her like needles. Power Couple of the Year, Ethan Vance and Sophia Thorne make their debut. A new force in clean energy. Clara Hayes, the forgotten wife. Some accounts tagged her. Others had already scrubbed her from the narrative, but the most painful absence was his. No text, no explanation, not even an excuse. Clara didn't sleep that night. She spent hours wandering through the house that once felt like a home and now felt like a museum of a dead life. The travel photos, the books she'd organized by color, the old notes stuck to the fridge, they all screamed memories that Ethan had evidently erased. In the morning, she tried to eat. The food tasted like ash. She tried to call her mother, but hung up before the first ring. She didn't want advice. She didn't want pity. What she wanted was to disappear. But then, the baby moved. A small, subtle flutter. A reminder that even if she was invisible to the world, she was still here. And that's when the text message arrived, from a number she hadn't seen in years. Liam Carter. "Clara, I know it's been a long time, but what Ethan did crossed a line. I'm back in the city. We need to talk." She just stared at the screen, motionless. Liam was the only man Ethan truly feared. And he was also the one person who knew everything, every secret, every betrayal, every lie, buried under the weight of success. Clara didn't text back, but something inside her shifted. It wasn't hate. It was clarity. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. And if you've ever been made to feel invisible by someone who promised to see you forever, like this video, because this story is far from over. And what Clara does next will prove that dignity isn't something you beg for, it's something you claim. The next morning, Clara woke before the sun. For the first time in weeks, the air felt different, as if the silence was no longer an enemy, but a starting point. She didn't reply to Liam's message, but late that afternoon, she walked to a quiet cafe on a corner of Lexington Avenue. She wore no makeup, wrapped in an old wool coat. He was already there. Liam Carter was exactly as she remembered, calm, direct, with eyes that saw right through the noise. He didn't ask questions. He didn't mention the headlines. All he said was, "You don't have to show up for him, but maybe you need to show up for yourself." Clara didn't answer, but she listened. That evening, she looked at her reflection with more honesty than she had in a long time. There she was, tired, swollen, but whole. She opened her closet and saw a dress she'd bought months ago, back when she still believed Ethan would take her, his wife, to the event. It was a deep midnight blue, with a soft cut that draped the body in effortless elegance. She hesitated, then put it on. The fabric fell over her belly, a declaration that her pregnancy wasn't a weakness. It was her presence. As she got ready, she remembered what Liam had told her before they left the cafe. "They're going to stare. People will whisper. The only thing that matters is that you're there." He was waiting for her outside in a simple, clean car. No flash, no spectacle, just an ally. On the drive over, Clara kept her eyes fixed on the city lights blurring past her window. Her heart was pounding, but the fear had started to subside. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclamation. When they arrived, the security guards hesitated for a moment when they saw her name on the list. But Liam simply said, "She's with me," and the velvet rope was opened. Inside the ballroom, the sound of a string quartet filled the air. Golden light danced on the walls. And for the first time in so long, Clara didn't feel like a ghost. She entered, carrying everything Ethan had discarded, embodying everything he could not control. The first glances were of shock, then pure confusion. Clara walked as if she knew exactly where she was going, even if, inside, every step felt heavier than the last. The blue dress flowed around her like a gentle wave, and her hand rested softly on her stomach. Liam was at her side, not as a shield, but as a quiet confirmation. The conversations began to die down, one by one. Champagne flutes froze mid-air. A chain of whispers cut through the room like a cold wind before a storm. Is that her? She's pregnant? Is that Liam Carter with her? Ethan Vance was holding court in the center of the room, standing beside Sophia, a perfectly rehearsed speech ready for his investors. But when he noticed the sudden shift in the room's energy, he turned toward the entrance and froze. His eyes locked on Clara, as if staring at a ghost he thought he'd personally buried. But she didn't look away. She didn't smile. She didn't challenge him. She simply existed. Beside him, Sophia tried to understand the scene. "Who is that?" But Ethan didn't answer. His face hardened. The practiced smile vanished. His entire body went rigid. Clara didn't have to say a thing. Her presence was a story in itself. Her body spoke. Her calm spoke. The man at her side spoke volumes. And when Liam gently placed a hand on the small of her back, it was as if the entire ballroom finally understood, without a single word being exchanged. Those closest to Ethan took a subtle step back. Glances were exchanged. Some people looked down, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. Ethan tried to hold his pose, but he was no longer the main character in the story. The party was still going, but the narrative had just found a new protagonist. Clara walked to the center of the ballroom and stopped. She lifted her chin. She took a deep breath. She hadn't come for a confrontation. She had come to remember who she was, and to prove that you can't erase a history just because you want to write a new one over it. Ethan crossed the floor with the unsteady steps of a man who has lost his footing. From a distance, Clara watched him approach, and she did not move an inch. When he stopped just a few feet away, she met his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet strength, the kind that comes from being ignored for so long you no longer feel the need to shout. "Clara," he said, his voice raw. "Ethan," she replied, her tone perfectly even. Liam remained beside her, still and respectful, his very presence a reminder of everything Ethan had tried to bury. "I didn't know you were coming," Ethan stammered, lost. "I know," she said. "I never wanted to hurt you like this." A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "But you did." His eyes fell to the floor. She then opened her purse, took out an envelope, and handed it to him without ceremony. "What's this?" "The chapter you forgot to close. It's the papers. Everything is handled. No fight, no drama." Ethan stared at the document, then back at her. "You're asking for almost nothing. I'm only asking for the one thing you couldn't give me, peace." For a moment he seemed to shrink, as if the custom-tailored suit no longer fit, as if the character he'd built was crumbling from the inside out. She adjusted her hair, took a slow, steadying breath and said, "I didn't come here to punish you, Ethan. I came here to remind you that I still exist, and that this baby was not born to live in the shadows." She touched her stomach, and then she walked away. No rush, no looking back, taking with her everything that Ethan could no longer touch. Sometimes the deepest wound isn't the betrayal, it's being forgotten while you are still standing right there. Clara didn't want a stage or a trophy. She just wanted to be seen. She wanted the story she helped build to not be rewritten without her name in it. But there is a certain kind of strength that is born from being abandoned. A voice that awakens when all you're left with is silence. And it was with that voice that she came back to herself, not to prove a point to him, but to remind herself of her own worth. Because when someone tries to erase you, their greatest mistake isn't just your absence. It's the arrogance of believing you won't reappear. And that's what Clara did. She reappeared, pregnant, poised, and whole. Ethan lost much more than a marriage that night. He lost the chance to stand beside the person who chose to love him through the hardest days. And her, she gained something far greater, the peace of rebuilding her own life, out loud, and the freedom to never shrink herself to fit into someone else's story again. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own value. And if you believe in real second chances, in quiet dignity, and in stories that heal, subscribe. Because there are so many voices that still deserve to be heard. Maybe the next one is yours.